button here and just turn it over to our wonderful presenters.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this Friday of our OLA Annual Conference. This session is Cultivating Tolerance Through Conversation, Creating an Inclusive Community at Your Library, and I hope you will enjoy. Also, if you guys will type your questions in the chat, we will field Q&A at the end. So I am Kelly Sitzman. I am a branch manager here with the Pioneer Library System in East Norman, and I am joined by the fabulous Mayor Bria Clark, Mayor of Norman, and Caroline Dolworth. She is Associate Director and Branch Manager of our Norman Public Library Central. So I am so honored to be presenting alongside you powerful ladies this morning. I know you are both so busy, so thank you for your time today.
I am very happy to be here. This is one of my favorite topics, and I am a lifelong lover of libraries, so it's an honor to be with you all today.
Thanks, Bria. So I want to give a brief overview of PLS and kind of set the scene for today's session. For those of you that aren't familiar, Pioneer Library System is a multi-county library system that serves Cleveland, Pottawatomie, and McLean counties. We have about over 250,000 registered users, and we have 12 branches in 10 different communities, including information stations across our rural areas, which you see on that map. Our total population is about 385,000, and our administrative offices are located in Norman, and we do have 3 branches in Norman. So strong representation there, and Bria has also been instrumental in helping that become a reality. So just to set the stage of where we are, the city of Norman, which we'll be talking about today, has a population of over 120,000 people. It is a university town, so that kind of fluctuates throughout the year of how long it takes you to drive anywhere. And we are a rural and urban community. We have downtown bustling streets, and then we also have lots of farmland, and Lake Thunderbird is our main source of water for central Oklahoma. So we serve a diverse population in Norman, and we're also the Cleveland County seat. So now that you know kind of where we are and what setting we're talking about today, I wanted to share our learning objectives, and we really hope that you can truly identify community leaders that represent marginalized groups in your community, whatever that looks like for where you are. We hope that you'll learn the application of having sensitive conversations with diverse groups, so some hands-on tips on how to apply that. And then create awareness of implicit bias in our communities. And kind of the theme today is be thinking about how this applies to you. We're telling our story today from the lens of Norman and this city and the libraries that serve it, but certainly we have people from all different types of communities and library types. So think about how this can apply to your job and your community. Certainly, there's always room for growth. So we're being vulnerable today and sharing our story. And now more than ever, it is really important that we be brave and not only have these conversations, but be that central host that starts the conversations. So think about what challenges you have in your community as we go through our slides today. So a few years back, unfortunately, Norman experienced an unfortunate series of events around acts of racism and prejudice, and this has sparked a lot of change in our community. It sparked a lot of conversations and trying to really overcome that and be resilient from those acts of racism. So these are just a few of the headlines that we got to read in our newspapers. But I don't want to highlight the negative, but I do want to highlight how we went from here to here. So how did Norman get to a place of being ranked one of the most, ranked the most inclusive city in our state? And one of the ways that we have worked toward this solution is by taking action toward inclusivity through the library and the city. You'll see this sign here. This is one of the initiatives that has come from those acts of racism. We have participated in pride parades that are hosted by our community and so many other different initiatives. But we're going to talk to you today about one example that includes a library partnership in how to create an inclusive community. So I'll turn it over to Bria now.
Thank you, Kelly. So I love that we are being honest about what has happened in our community, because every community deals with implicit and explicit racism in one way or another, because it's just part of the history of our nation, as we've seen, as we're all involved in one of the most I think public and deep reckonings that our nation is facing. And so now more than ever, events like the beloved Community Speaker Series are important. And if you're pausing at all thinking, oh, well, we're fine, we don't need to do that, I challenge you to look deeper. I challenge you to speak to your marginalized communities, because again, I think the events of the last couple months have shown we have a lot of work to do. And when I have a lot of work to do and I need a safe space in my community, one of the first places I look is my libraries. And so after all those events happened, I was attending the mayor's interfaith breakfast, and I was not mayor at that time. One of the speakers spoke about Martin Luther King's vision for a beloved community. And that really stuck out to me. And I realized that we have a lot of conversations that we need to continue having. When we changed the name of DeBar Avenue, that was a start. And then the racist graffiti happened, and we're continuing to see the need for important and sensitive conversations. And so our first thought was, well, let's reach out to these marginalized communities. Let's give them an opportunity to share their story from their perspective on topics that we all deal with. And originally it started with just the four marginalized groups each having their own event. And a member of our Human Rights Commission pointed out that people from those communities will be the ones that attend, and you're not going to actually reach the other communities that need to hear that story. So he had the wonderful idea of putting one from each community on each of the panel to discuss each topic and how it affects them personally. And I definitely recommend going that route, because I'm sure you've seen it too. When you have an event that celebrates Native American history or Hispanic American history, the main attendees are people who already belong to that culture. So it's not the outreach that you need. And so we decided to opt with that. And as you can see, we spaced them out quite well. And we had them all in safe spaces at our libraries. They're not, and I say safe spaces because they're not political. They're, it's easy to feel welcome there. The services they provide, it's very much a safe space for our communities. And notice we did it all around town too. We included the university because they're obviously one of our main university partners. And so identifying that we want to do this was step one, but then the groups, I think you can look at what's going on in your local communities, but also nationally to identify who needs to be speaking and what topics need to be covered. But then you have to identify the exact speakers. And so that's where I think building a great network of community partners was incredibly important in the success of this event. We obviously involve the libraries, we involve the university, we involve Norman Public Schools, we involve the Xenia Institute, and it was through that great network we were able to identify speakers that would be very impactful and contribute a lot to these panels. So let's go to the next slide. And Caroline, you jump in when you're ready to talk about the format, but I can touch on the topics. I think were timely, as they always are. I think each year you could, especially now, you could pull from the headlines and find more topics to consider. And I think that it has to be relevant and timely. And so being in touch with your community as a whole. And so it was with that working group of all the community partners where we had conversations and established the topics and then looked at panelists. When we did this on round two, Norman Public Schools had a great contribution in terms of who should sit on it, including youth, because they often get misrepresented in the headlines and generations don't speak to each other. So that was a really nice, I think, addition to round two. And it changed. So in the first round, we had Native American, African American, LGBTQ, and one more. But then we tried to stay away from religion, I think for obvious reasons, but there comes a time where you have to talk about religion. And so in the first one, our fourth group was Middle Eastern descent, which often when you look a certain way, you're Muslim. It is what it is. And so it was neat to include people who were of Middle Eastern descent who weren't Muslim to help address that. But obviously we were more than happy to include the Muslim community because they are such an important part of our community. But then with round two, we flat out talked about Jewish Americans because that was part of the graffiti that we were dealing with was very anti-Semitic. And so I get trying to be careful and not dive into political waters, but sometimes that's what has to happen. And you have to be bold about that and show support because these are the communities that are needing that support. And so talk to your community partners about issues that are specifically going on in your community. For example, Norman reallocated some funding for our police department in the upcoming year. That would be a very timely conversation for us to have with round two or round three at this point, and I'm sure that we will. And so the panelists, that's obviously more, I think, impactful if they're from your community. As a college town, we have, and also in a metro area, it's easy to get people from Oklahoma City. And sometimes we had that, but it's, I think, again, people who've been there their whole lives can speak about what they've been through. And it was such an eye-opening experience for me because we are only fortunate enough to know the wealth of our own experiences. And to hear the experience of someone who's lived in your town their whole life, same amount of time as you, and had a completely different experience that may not be as welcoming as what you experienced was very powerful. And those are exactly the kind of conversations that we need to have right now to build those bridges that will encourage and support diversity and defeat ignorance. So they were amazing events. And I also recommend that you have someone record them and kind of build a history of that. And we worked hard to do that. I think we had technical difficulties on a couple of them, but I think that's something, if you go into it knowing we're going to record it, it's going to be a home in our library where they can be checked out and watched, especially for classes to enjoy. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that diversity will be a topic that we will continue to be discussing on the forefront of all of our institutions, from business to schools. And so these kind of recorded conversations can be very, very valuable in educating residents of all ages moving forward. Caroline, do you have anything else to add to the format?
I will add to that a little bit later, just to say that I think having that variety of topics also helped, so that we weren't just inviting people to say, tell us about your life, tell us about who you are. Having a topic that they could start out with, I think helped.
It also helps find your panelists. When we talked about mental health, we knew that we could reach out to people who provide services, but then they could also recommend people who were receiving services but would be comfortable talking about it. And same thing with education. So I think, and then stereotypes. I mean, we've had, as a college town, a wealth of resources in terms of professors at the university who have spent their whole life studying this. And so, but then also your average resident who's lived it. So it was a great way to diversify the panel. And again, not just with the obvious diversity, but diversity of experiences. And I think that was really special. And I would also encourage you to include young people, and not just have youth as a category, but their perspective is wholly different, as we all know, from someone who's, more experienced in life. So tapping into the community partners. Don't pretend to know the answers. I didn't. I try to surround myself with people who do. And that's why I think the community partners was so important. Again, education, your business community. I think there's going to be a great opportunity, and I'm throwing this out to Caroline and Kelly right now, for our next round to talk about how we're supporting minority and women-owned businesses. That would be an excellent opportunity to include the business community and, again, build bridges, because that's what this is all about. And getting people to attend, and also offer it virtually, like the world right now. So We've all learned to adapt with the format like this, a Zoom format, even Facebook Lives are really, really helpful. And I think it's got to be continued. It can't be something you do once because, oh man, this is what's popular and what we're talking about. We're always going to need to have these conversations. There's always room to grow and learn and educate others about your own experiences and do it in a safe way. And that's why I think the libraries were such a key piece to creating a space where people could be vulnerable, and frame it as an educational opportunity, not some contentious debate that would end with people needing to be escorted out. And they were very peaceful. We also offered the opportunity, and I don't want to step on Caroline's toes, but for people to ask questions without raising their hand, because so often, and as a person who's Caucasian and straight, and I don't have a lot of diverse experiences in terms of my own personal life, but I got a lot of questions. But we're also scared to ask stupid questions or questions that may come off as insensitive. So we provided an opportunity where you could write your questions down and then submit them to the moderator. And the moderator is another key piece. Your panelists are going to be changing the whole time. And so the moderator should be someone that is consistent and can do every single one. And so once you've selected you don't even have to have the topics yet. Once you've got the dates, lock down your moderator. And we were incredibly fortunate to have a former editor of our local newspaper, Andy Rieger. So he was able to bring this fascinating historical perspective as well. So if you can find a gem like that, he just was amazing and didn't hesitate to volunteer. We're grateful for his service, and I am planning on hitting him up for round 3 if he will be so kind to do that. And so that's, I think, a key piece of consistency, not only using your libraries, but having the same moderator. And it gives it the same tone despite the topic and the panelists changing.
Absolutely.
So,
you touched on, Bria, a point that I wanted to bring up was we presented this session at the Exchange just in April. And even since then, there's been so many things that have changed in our world at a local level and also at a national level and international level. So I think that continuation of, not just a one and done, we did it, we feel good about ourselves, but there's always going to be a relevant topic to bring up.
I completely agree. And like you said, it can't be a one and done because that looks and almost feels like lip service. Like, oh, we're responding to what's going on. And we're always going to need to have these conversations. And one of the most consistent rocks of any community is the library. And again, another reason why I think that is the perfect host for it. But all of the partners have to be involved. For example, we worked with the schools not only to get their input and ideas, but to also have them promote the event to their students. And some of these topics are pretty sensitive, so obviously high school is the way to go. And with the university, I work at OU. I'm like, offer that extra credit. Get these young people here. Let's get them attending and engaging because they do add so much. And so the city of Norman, I helped host it, obviously, and organize as well. And the Xenia Institute for Social Justice, they are an organization that brings partners from different faith communities, different backgrounds, and that we're looking for ways to connect and share a similar message. So they were a very natural partner for this as well. I think going forward, you could include organizations like PFLAG, or it just really depends on who's on your panel. Or the 4 groups you choose for the events throughout the year. And I think quarterly worked out really well for us. We weren't able to kind of finish that this year, again, for obvious reasons, but it was timely, and definitely have all the dates selected before you roll out the first one. So you can say like, if you can get the topics too, that way it's clear. It's a package. This is a journey. It's not a one-time event. And you will get different panelists, but the same backgrounds will be represented. And I think it's so important to have the backgrounds, but different panelists, because that also shows that even within, that category of LGBTQ or African American, everyone's experience is different. And that's so important, I think, for people to understand, is just because you're female or just because you're young, we all handle things differently. So that was great, and you can promote it all at once. and mark your calendars. Here's what we're doing. And then leading up to the event, which we housed on Facebook, we would kind of preview the panelists. Like, here's their headshot and here's their background. So it gave you more, like, I don't know, you got in front of people's faces leading up to it. So it was an easy way to promote it for sure. There you go. Okay. And this one was from the PLS read, correct?
Yeah, no, this one was interesting too. You know, you spoke about giving people an opportunity to ask a question without having to be the one in the audience raising their hand and asking the question. I think that was important on a number of levels. Besides just being embarrassing to the person asking the question, we were able to gather those at the end and ask the panelists the questions, and we were able to do that in a respectful way. That way, so if someone said it, you know, if someone asked an awkward question, we could rephrase it. If several people were asking the same question, we might make sure that we were carrying that through with all of the panelists. And one of the things that was nice about tying it to the PLS reads, which that year was The Hate You Give, we'd had several book clubs and everybody in the community reading that book. We had shown the movie in a couple of our communities, so we promoted it very well. I think that ended up making this the largest crowd that did come to it. But one of the things I like about tying it to a book is that sometimes people don't want to talk about their personal stuff. But if you can talk to it in terms of a character in a book, it's easier to bring that topic out in the open. So, you know, the questions were kind of like the questions we would have had in a book club, perhaps. But it then led off to people talking about their personal experiences. So I kind of like having that framework. And Bria and I are going to do it's a mayor's book club. And I should be calling you Mayor Clark. It is the mayor's book club that we are going to embark on online here soon, kind of doing the same thing. We're touching on some sensitive topics in both cases, and we'll see how it works online. But again, if you want to take on one of those books, like How to Be an Anti-Racist, that might be a good time to invite this whole panel. And it doesn't have to just be a panel then of African Americans. Everybody has something else to offer. And a lot of times, you know, a Hispanic person might come in and say, I feel that way too. Or I also observed that when I was reading the book. So keeping your topic and your audience diverse is really important. So yeah, this was one of the panels, and you can see the panelists up there. They were a little up in the away from the audience. In the next slide, I kind of like this one a little better. We tried to make it more intimate. Some of our groups did start out small, but in this case, you can see we were all right there, and it really did feel like we were having a true conversation. We did hand out the cards for the questions, but we weren't strict about it. There were times that people would just say something in the middle of a discussion and it would lead into something else. So we didn't stop people from having a real conversation, but we did allow for kind of our moderator to take those questions on. This one was a very animated discussion that night, and we actually went beyond the hour that it was up because we just had so many things to say.
I would throw out there, if you're considering doing this, the first one we did was kind of like we invited older residents to come speak about the history of their experience with racism in your community. And you want to talk about eye-opening. We had, I mean, because they were able to talk about how far we've come, but it really set the stage for how far we still have to go. And so I would definitely recommend starting with that. You know, tell me about your experiences in our community. You know, we had true local legends on our very first panel with Dr. George Henderson, Jacob Sotai, and it was just powerful. And it gave you hope because you're like, okay, we have improved. But again, it set the stage for, and we have work to do. And I'll never forget that one. And that one, I think, was Facebook Live from my Clark for Norman mayor's page. If you're interested in going back and watching it, it was very well done. And after that, I actually got a few emails from residents thanking me.
Oh, it was so well done. It's a piece of history now for Norman. It really is. And I think you touched on something too. You don't want to just ask anyone to your panel. You want to find out who the perceived leaders of these various groups are, because George Henderson is well respected. It brought a lot of other people in. So, and that's where Bria was really good about finding the various leaders of these groups. But, just talk to a group and find out who is your spokesperson, who is one of your leaders, who's somebody that's highly respected, so that you get people that want to come and listen to them.
And I think an upside to us having kind of dived in first with this is, if you're reaching out to build this network and invite these speakers and people seem hesitant, you can say, well, it's like what Norman did, and you can point to it. And so they know that they're not going to be on trial or have to defend themselves. There's actually a format and videos that you can point to. So they'll feel a little more safe, and I think open to ideas if you do happen to come against any resistance. But my experience was people were thrilled to have the opportunity to share their story in a safe place and answer questions, because so many people just want to share their story. They want to build bridges, and this event series really creates that opportunity. And as long as I'm around and able, I hope we continue it, because and bring the kids. I mean, I don't know. I bring my kids have a wholly different experience than other people's children, I've gathered, but but this is what we need to hear if we're going to grow as a community and a nation. And it's an excellent opportunity to do it. And it just wouldn't have been the same without the involvement of our libraries.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I will have time for questions at the end, but one thing I wanted you to speak to was how you did find those leaders. And you are so plugged into the community. Even before you were our lovely mayor, you were on city council and working at the university. But for those of our attendees that may not be as plugged in, what advice would you have for them to reach out and find those people and make that ask?
Mine really started with faith communities. I've been involved with our Hispanic church, where they speak Spanish, and I've actually translated some live videos with them throughout the pandemic, and then our African American churches, our mosque. And so those are where I think you can find people who are ready to build bridges, who have their own faith leaders, and they also bring, again, their own audiences with them, which when you, again, mix up the panels, you'll get your Muslim community listening to the African American experience, and it's really special. And so don't be afraid to, faith communities are also very welcoming. You'll have some organizations where it can be a little intimidating. We've got a few of those in Norman, but don't be afraid to ask. And so, and again, by involving your university, if you have one, your local school district, your business community, that further expands your reach. And I was involved in PTA, so I knew a lot of different educators from that perspective. And so if you're wondering, okay, where do I even start? Start with your faith communities. Identify the groups that you're interested in first, that are most timely and what your community needs to hear. And then start with, again, if you go LGBTQ, do you have a P flag? Do you have some sort of support group? But faith communities are an excellent place to start.
Thank you. Sorry, Caroline, to cut you off.
No, that's fine. I was kind of going that direction too. One of the things I want to talk about is why the library, and what you can do to make the library that kind of place. I think people do feel very safe at our library. And I think a lot of that is because we've done a lot of things building up to this. We've had programs, like Muslim Voices and things like that. We've had book discussions with books that were popular with other groups. We've marched in the Pride Parade as the library. We don't just put African American books out in February. I mean, I think that's really important, is that you need to make yourself diverse all the time. You need to have things out that children of color can see in the library. You need to welcome them. Sometimes we started with outreach. We went to some apartments and did story times where we had to speak in other languages, and then invited them to the library. And over time, then we started having enough people come to the library that we started a bilingual story time on Saturdays. So sometimes you have to go to that community and kind of work your way in with your trust so that then they feel the trust to come to the library. And now I feel like everyone does feel the library is a safe place to have these conversations.
Excellent point.
Absolutely.
I mean, you've got to meet people where they are, and they've done just a fantastic job building those relationships and creating that genuinely safe, welcoming space where I think if we tried to host an event like this at City Hall, I don't, it would not, I will definitively say it would not have the same success or the same welcoming feel to it.
Yeah, and it definitely wasn't all gloom and doom either. I think that's something that, these are serious and sensitive conversations, but we, at the session at East, everybody was laughing, everybody was getting along. And I don't mean to make it sound like Disneyland, but there were moments, where you get goosebumps and you have that uncomfortable feeling of, oh man, maybe we were a part of that or something, that's my community, and for better or worse. But it wasn't just, the heavy subjects. There was real bonding and relationship building going on between the panelists and between panelists and audience members too. That was really awesome to be a part of and experience.
Yeah, I agree. Often the groups that the panelists represented, you'd see them connecting. And so it's always so fun to see new relationships forming. So, I mean, you got the audience hearing it and again, their own reflecting, was I a part of that? How can I help? But okay, well, I didn't know you were involved with that organization. I'm involved with this one. We should really make that happen. And that was really cool to see.
Yeah, definitely a lot of synergy. Well, and talking about the topics you selected too, they were interesting and topics that I wouldn't think are necessarily super controversial for some instances. I know community resources was one that you had built a panel around, and education was another that is a hot button topic. But when you're thinking about topics too, like Bria said, it doesn't have to just be religion, but what other resources or topics do you want to bring to light in your community as well? So feel free to get creative with what those topics are.
I think a good one, we've seen with the rise, and I hate to say the rise of Juneteenth because it's always been here, but it's now being recognized and people are wanting to build events or, and whatnot around that. That could be a panel itself, with your group. What events should our community be recognizing and participating in, and how do we support that? I think that would be a very timely one. Because, especially in Norman, we saw the end of the 89er Day Parade. Well, what could we replace that with? What would be impactful? And how do we do it right? So again, it's not just this, we've done it, we're checking the box and moving on. Right. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be these serious education, policing reform. It could be something, what community events could we do to better connect each other and also make it educational? So that one is one I'd like to possibly see us explore. And you don't want it to be super heavy all the time, because you can have meaningful conversations without, having these very serious topics, but you can't shy away from them either. If you could perhaps balance your topic schedule, I think that would be helpful. And even just defeating stereotypes, that's kind of a broad enough one where it's like, okay, what are stereotypes you've encountered? Because I've done a lot of reflection on this. I've talked about implicit bias when I used to teach it back at OU, and I would ask my students, tell me a stereotype that you've encountered based on a factor that you were born with. Burnett, I'm always the villain in school plays, never the ingenue, or something that you took on yourself, like I'm a registered Democrat. So that's something I've chosen, and it was fascinating to hear their stereotypes. And every time you'd hear one, and the ones that would get you like, oh my gosh, I think I have that stereotype. It's the perfect time for reflection. And it's a broad enough topic where you don't know what you're going to get. So be a little careful with that. And it's also, and I almost forgot this, with your group that selects the panels and the topics, you got to come up with some starter questions to get it started with your moderator. And those are, I think, really important, and they help set the tone, but then obviously creates an opportunity for the audience to engage as well.
And we asked the same question to all of them. We didn't pick particular questions. So I had some of those here when we were talking about diversity. the thing that what kinds of things do we do in the workplace that are not inclusive? That was very enlightening. And it wasn't just about holiday things. There were a lot of things that we realized we were doing innocently that weren't inclusive. So the questions were asked to each of the panelists, and they were the same questions, and they were large questions, I guess, instead of specific pointed questions at any particular group. And as you can see there, they had a microphone, and they just passed the microphone. So Andy Rieger would ask the question, and one person would answer it, and then they'd pass the microphone to another, and someone else would say, oh, wait a minute, I have something else to say. So that was kind of a dynamic exchange too. So I think having your questions definitely in advance really helped.
And not just having them advance for the moderator, but we would send like the night before to the whole panel saying, be here at this time, we'll have water, try and keep your responses to 2 to 3 minutes. You got to put that in there, even though it can get difficult when there's great conversation to reel it back in. So you need a moderator that's comfortable and able to do that. But give them the questions ahead of time so they're not caught off guard, because I think some of the little bit of hesitant that I received when I would approach panelists was, well, what are you going to ask me? Like they don't want super sensitive, obviously prejudicial questions being thrown at them from left field. So if you give them a preview, and then again, a moderator who, when he sees the questions, to go, nope. And, and that's helpful as well.
Absolutely. And I think too, talking about the Mayor Book Club that we're rolling out soon, find ways to fit this in with what you're already doing. Or if you have a panel and it's been going on for a while, find ways to refresh it, adding the PLS reads in. If you do a big read program or some kind of citywide read, that definitely adds a different set of, a different audience maybe that you wouldn't have reached otherwise, and keeps that program fresh and, fresh in people's minds. So tweaking it just a little bit can make it relevant and keep it, alive in your audience's eyes as well. Which kind of ties into our next point, which is all of these sessions and these series that we put on really tied back to our mission statements. So you'll see here, this is the City of Norman's is building an inclusive community. So obviously that fits in. Good job. And for Pioneer, we're inspiring innovation, engagement, and learning in our communities. So when I say picture yourself here, I want you to think about how this fits in with you. Again, we're not here today to tell you this is the formula, the magic formula. There are definitely tips and tricks that we've learned along the way, best practices, but what does this look like in your community? And maybe you're not in a public library, maybe you're in a school library or an academic or a special. All of those avenues are great spaces to have these conversations. And we hope that your conversations aren't sparked the same ways that ours were. Don't wait for something horrible to happen in your community before you say, hey, let's talk about this. Be proactive and build that space ahead of time. That's not the lesson we want you to take away, is that you have to wait for something to happen to start this.
I can't stress that enough. I mean, it's such an excellent point, because what really inspired me was the DeBar Avenue, I would say, discussion, but it was an awakening, because I'm sitting there on the dais and the comments from the community. I realized, as involved as I wasn't connected enough to this. I wasn't seeing what our community was really struggling with. And so again, if you're thinking, oh, well, we're fine, you're not. I'm just going to say it. You're not. And you can be proactive and lead the way with these conversations instead of being reactive. And so I'm not sad that we were reactive. I'm glad that we woke and decided that we needed to do this. But I encourage you to take the lead on it, especially now with everything going on. There is no downside to having sensitive and important and meaningful dialogue in your community. There's just not.
All right. We can continue to chat a little bit, but if anybody has questions, if you'll drop it in the chat, and Caroline, I think, is going to field those for us. Great. Great. We've got one from Catherine. Did you receive pushback from anyone in the community? If so, how did you address criticism from people in the community? Sorry, I just said Caroline's going to field those, and I read that. So sorry.
Oh, I thought you meant I was going to have to answer them all.
Oh yeah, Caroline's going to answer all the questions for us.
No, that's okay.
We could both probably answer that one from our respective positions.
Not to
I can jump in.
Can we say that? Not to our faces, that most of the pushback we get is like on social media, and it's coming from people who don't want to come to the library and tell you these things. They want to just say something on social media. If they came to me personally and asked, we say things like, the library's for everybody. This program is for you just as well as it is for everybody else. And that is our stance, no matter what kinds of pushback we get about programs or displays or anything else. We try to make sure that people know the library's for everybody, and we're going to defend anyone that comes in the library. I don't know if we do defend social media. I think you don't, but that's just my take. What do you want to say about that, Bria?
I can say a lot about that, but yeah. I'll be honest with you. I am on social media to post, and I get off for my own mental health, especially right now. But with these events, I didn't receive any pushback. I honestly expected well, where's the white person on the panel? Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, you're on Everyday Life's panel, so no. But I didn't get any of that. But again, I'm sure there was something, but they didn't say it to my face. And I was curious if we would get pushback. Well, why didn't you include this group? Why didn't you include this group? And I didn't even hear much of that, because I think we made it clear that we have 4 for now. 4 is a good number. We're not doing more, but we will continue this conversation. This isn't our one and done. We will bring in other, I don't want to say not represented, but people who need to share their story more. And we stuck to that. And I think that helped people see that, okay, it's not just these groups, it's for all groups. It's just, we can only do 4 at a time type thing.
Here's a great question about how do you break down echo chambers, especially now that we can't be in person?
Ooh, that is a really good question. I suppose by making sure that the groups that you are inviting also share that information and bring their groups with them, so that we have more than just one group being represented. We have several people all talking to each other. But I don't know. That's a really tough question.
Well, I think, again, by adding a diverse panel, when we had originally thought to do this will be our topic with African Americans, and we'll have someone, a female, obviously male, female, young, old, but that I think would have been more of an echo chamber. And so you kind of defeat the echo chamber with the diversity of panelists, at least in my opinion. And again, don't pretend to know the best panelists. Reach out to that, again, a faith community or a Xenia Institute, and let them throw out the best panelists. Because I did have one say, you know what, I'm really not comfortable, but this is someone you should really talk to. They'd be great for this. And so I think the diversity helps defeat the echo chamber kind of experience in itself.
And, you are going to get people who are coming to learn. So you're getting people who want to hear and they want to take part in it. You're probably not going to get people who are, and I'm really glad we didn't, but people who are against us having that panel. So,
Yeah.
That's a good thing. You've got people who are sitting there ready to hear.
Yeah. And I would say, don't be afraid to market this. Market it widely and broadly, and hopefully, sometimes you do have the crowd that shows up and they already know all of this information. But like Caroline said, a lot of people, even if you think you know all of this information, you don't. But don't be afraid to share this event and invite a wide variety of people. Make sure that you're not just sharing it to groups that you think will accept it, but I think that's something that sometimes you got to be brave. You got to be brave to invite people that you may not think would enjoy it.
I had an audience member afterwards say, I came to hear this experience, but that panelist, wow. I mean, that was very special. So yeah, be brave. Be brave.
Yeah, be brave. Someone had said, what way did the audience participate? Like I said, we did hand out the little cards early in the program so that they could write them down. And we said, there'll be time for questions and answers later. That didn't, again, stop us though, because I can remember at one, someone said, well, I didn't write this down on my card, but now I have a question. And we were open to that too. So it wasn't so much that the audience participated by asking a lot of questions during the program, but they did get an opportunity to. Yeah. And did you have any tension in the events? And nothing ever, we never had to eject anybody. We've never had protesters or trolls show up for these programs. I think they know it's the library and that we're not going to allow that to happen in whatever way. I mean, I was prepared at one point. I thought if there becomes a problem, I'm going to quietly go lead somebody out or talk to them in the hall or, the very worst security. But we never had anybody outside demonstrating or anything like that.
That's another reason why I think it's important to have level-headed people. I'm not saying I'm not level-headed, but my capacity for BS is pretty much at its limit right now. So I'm like Caroline, but we didn't have anything like that. I think most of that was the safe space of the library. They knew this wasn't going to be a political event that went crazy and we're going to, make our protest signs afterwards and go take on the police department or city hall or pick one. It was just a discussion. Yeah. And having community, panelists from the community that people know, I think was really important too, because it humanized it. It was like, we are going to talk about a sensitive topic, but these are your neighbors and you should get to know them and their thoughts on it. So I think making it personal, not political, is really important for something like this.
I would wholeheartedly agree. I think that there isn't really an agenda. There isn't a vote coming up right after that, or, there's nothing that leads to. It's just a conversation is so important. And also, I think your point of they're your neighbors, they are community leaders. We had so many comments on those bios leading up to the event of people that were like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited Charlotte's going to be here, so that builds excitement. And they're already trusted people that are respected in the community and well-known. And so I think that just helped build excitement and kind of give street cred to these folks and I don't know that there's probably a better term, but it helped authenticate, I guess, the event itself. There's a really great question in the chat. If we have time, if you find yourself being reactive to a situation, how do you move forward in a way that allows you to be proactive next time? And how do you maintain an ongoing awareness of what issues are impacting different parts of your community without being the mayor, I guess?
Yeah. They come to me at this point. But I think, Caroline had touched on earlier of the community outreach, of being in these communities that need to be represented, that are underrepresented. That'll help you keep a pulse on it. Obviously, right now, you can't avoid issues going on, but this is an unprecedented situation in our community. But if you want to start the conversations and you're not entirely sure, start with building your partner network. Let them tell you what's happening in their communities. Because again, we only have the knowledge of what's happening right here. And so step one in this event is, again, identifying the community partners, the libraries, the schools, some nonprofits, and then just listen, because they'll have something. I promise you they will. But if you're not entirely sure, start with something like defeating stereotypes.
Right. Very, very broad. Education, diversity in education, diversity in the workplace. I mean, those are such broad topics that issues will come up when you're talking about those topics, but you have a broad enough topic that people aren't going, oh, they're talking just about defunding the police or something like that. They're talking specifically about our community and the best way to deal with mental health. So that's a different way of approaching it and presenting it to the community than we're just going to talk about this one hot button issue.
The way you frame it is so important.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we're almost at time. Thank you both for your expertise and thanks for being brave and putting these events on. And I took notes, Bria, so we'll be in touch soon about our next round, virtually, hopefully. But thank you guys for your time, and thank you to everyone who attended this morning and for your attention and hanging in there with us on a Friday morning. So
Yeah, thank you. It's great to see you all again.
Yes, thank you for everyone watching, for all that you do. You are the difference makers in our community, and it's an honor to get to be a part of this panel today. And thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Mayor Clark, very much. That we really appreciate you taking the time to be here, and we really appreciate the fact that you and your connections were what got this all started, and the things that you bravely do every day. So thank you too.
thank you guys.
All right, bye-bye.